UK Motor Talk.
Hello and welcome to UK Motor Talk. I'm Dave, not Mike, unfortunately. He is doing other things, but I'll be here tonight to steer you through the world of motorsport with our two experts.
Hello there, I'm Jim. Good to see you all again, although we're slightly short-handed, as you say, this week, but Mike is, we need to be careful how we phrase it. I think we've phrased things like this awkwardly. Sadly is no longer with us is a phrase that's been bandied around, and then miraculously the next week is happily with us once again, so it's a bit of resurrection going on there.
Yeah, sort of Lazarus TV or radio. Hello, and I'm Graham.
There we are. You can tell we're not used to doing the intros without Mike at the helm, aren't we?
I'm
sure we'll ramble through as best we can. And chap, we've got motorsport season starting up again fairly soon, so we're gonna try and rattle through. What are we going to try and do? Formula One, bit of touring cars, maybe touch on a bit of Formula E, but I think Formula One's been in the headlines. Probably more so than any other motorsport over the last couple of weeks for the testing, but we're not allowed to call it a test. It's been a shakedown or something else. It's couldn't quite understand why it wasn't televised and more covered live during the day, but there's been plenty of roundup shows and plenty of footage of all the cars going around the track, so we've had a very good chance to see what the 2022 cars look like, and God, they all look really, really good. I don't think there's one that I don't particularly like, and just the presence of them on the track with the new aero rules that they have, they look a lot cleaner, a lot simpler. The rear wings look a lot more dramatic to the eye, and they look good to me.
They do to me. There's some interesting developments in the aerodynamics, not all of which I gather the FIA are entirely happy with. I was reading a news release from the FIA today, and Ross Brawn is saying that they're not quite in the spirit that we've intended, or we had intended when we drew up these new regulations. And there are already one or two queries about, is Red Bull's rear spoiler exactly as it should be, and one or two other people's various suspension geometries may not comply. Might. But I think what we've seen in Barcelona has been, in some cases, cars that were sort of gaffer taped together. Very nice paint jobs, some of them, but certainly not the definitive cars. And I think we'll get to the Middle East in a few weeks' time before we actually see the definitive cars. I was greatly amused by the tremendous efforts into the new aerodynamics, the ground effects era, the recreation of that. I think I can remember at least one, or possibly two, ground effects eras, and the porpoising effect created by these very low centres of gravity. So it was great to see in day two that people were using all kinds of saws to cut bits of their hugely expensive bodywork out to try and make the things easier to drive.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, this porpoising thing. I vaguely, I was fairly young when it was still in vogue the first time around, but I believe it's something to do with the fact that the car gets so efficient and sucks itself to the ground so much that it then stalls like an aircraft wing would, loses all the pressure, and then has to do it all again. So it's going in cycles the whole time, trying to make up what it's just lost, and you end up with this very uncomfortable ride for the drivers.
Yeah, that's spot on. It gets so efficient with the downforce, as you say, and pulls the car down to the point it goes past the point of no return. So almost, I suppose, like a pendulum type effect on it. It just pushes itself around so far, and then it just perpetually does that. And it did look a little bit odd. I think at one point some of the drivers were saying they're going to have to get gum shields or things like that to try and solve it. But I think for such a sweeping raft of rule changes aerodynamically, not too much on the mechanical side. The engines have stayed broadly the same in terms of rules. There's a few manufacturers have brought engine upgrades and changed philosophies. Ferrari particularly, their engine seems quite potent as long as it's completely within the rules and not down to timing of when it measures the fuel flow, etc. The Ferrari engine looks good. But for such a sweeping set of rules, there was a concern all the cars would look exactly the same as the rules were too prescriptive. But I think just in terms of initial layout, whether all the cars converge on a common philosophy as the years go on, I suspect they will. But initially, it's good to see that there's a few different approaches, whether it's push rod, pull rod at the front and vice versa at the rear, or the same front and rear. Good to see a few teams have gone different ways. I think there's good sides and bad sides to both push rod and pull rod. Ultimately, I don't think it'll make or break any team's season if they've gone push rod or pull rod at the expense of the other, as long as you can get the overall package working. But how the different front wings take different approaches to trying to feed that air more through the Venturi tunnels underneath and get the ground effect has been good to see. But I think that most of the cars seemed fairly reliable, I think. I mean, even though if running down the lap charts, Ferrari topped that with 439 laps, which is a hell of a lot in 3 days.
It's quite impressive.
If you haven't driven a Formula One car in anger for a few months, as none of them will have done, I know they've all been down the gym and training and lifting up cars with their neck muscles or whatever it is they seem to do. I think most of them seem to have stronger necks than most people have entire body strength. But I don't think anything quite prepares you properly for driving an F1 car other than actually driving it. 439 laps, very impressive. Bottom of the charts, Haas, which I think given they wrote off last year before it had even started, I think they'd have probably wanted to get a few more laps than that under their belt. But of course, Haas and Nikita Mazepin and the situation, which I'm sure we're all well aware of. I mean, we're not a political podcast, that's for certain. We're supposed to be a car podcast, and we occasionally completely lose the plot when it comes to that. But I do think it's worth saying that it's a horrible situation out there, and we hope it gets resolved as soon as possible for the people in Ukraine more than anything else. It just seems odd to me that in 2022 we can end up in this situation. So just fingers crossed things can get sorted sooner rather than later, and people can get back to rebuilding their lives and try and stay safe. But the knock-on effects of that situation we can't really ignore in terms of Formula One. Haas sponsorship, of course, comes from Uralkali, which is Dmitry Mazepin's company, and he's got very close ties to Putin. Nikita Mazepin, his drive is tied to that sponsorship, but also his ability to travel around the world to do 2,482 races, or however many we're going to try and do this year, is linked to having a visa for each country. So I think there's only about 3 countries that he can actually travel to at the moment. Every other country has said, nope, go away, closed to you. So I don't think we'll be seeing Mazepin lining up for the entire season. I could be wrong. The only way I can see him lining up on the grid for every race this season is that peace is declared tomorrow. So actually, in a perverse way, if Nikita is on the grid for the entire season, it would be one of the best things in the world, which I never thought I'd say that, but it's strange times. After a strange couple of years, it's more strange times, really. But
just to butt in there, obviously it's a fluid situation, the whole sort of situation with Ukraine at the minute, but there has been an FIA statement regarding the situation, which does say no Russian or Belarusian national teams will participate in international zone competitions, e.g. the FIA Motorsport Games until further notice. No Russian, Belarusian national symbols, colours, flags, uniform, equipment and car should be displayed, or anthems should be played at international zone competitions until further notice. And further to that, Haas driver Nikita Mazepin will be allowed to compete in Formula One this season after the FIA confirmed that Russian and Belarusian drivers can race under a neutral flag. So again, there's still the situation potentially with his visa and access to the actual countries. But as far as the FIA are concerned, sport wins out and he can race without any affiliations. Sorry to butt in on it. That's literally popped up just now.
Certainly, I understand there was supposed to be a meeting between Mazepin and the team and their respective lawyers at some point during today. So I guess the two things are interconnected.
Well, if Gunter Steiner didn't have enough on his plate already, I think he certainly does now.
Probably do without this, and I imagine being a fly on the wall of the Haas boardroom would be quite an interesting experience at the minute. But anyway, let's leave that one there.
Let's move on.
The Haas itself, I think it looks not quite as polished, not quite as developed as it could be, and certainly wasn't the most reliable. Certainly wasn't the quickest either, so I'm maybe slightly worried about them. Next up, we had the Alfa Romeo. Certainly looked good in its camouflage livery, although it made picking out the details very, very tricky, as it was supposed to do. But
fuzzy photography helped.
When they did finally launch the livery, that looked rather nice. That livery, I do quite like that. I know it's a variation on last year, but it does look rather special, I think.
It does look lovely, and I agree. I think it looked fantastic in the disguise camouflage livery as well. But then again, I think it looks even better in the red and white, and it's a nice classic livery. It's certainly one that's going to look good on screen and on track this year.
Although I fear it might be slightly towards the back end. They certainly didn't get a massive reliable running, and Valtteri Bottas only had a handful of laps. I think Guan Yu Zhou was the quickest of the Alfa Romeo drivers, I think just by virtue of having completed a few more laps, and he was some 19, 21, 22, some 3 seconds off the pace of Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. Spoiler alert: the Mercedes were on top again. But I think that's why the first test wasn't a test; it was a shakedown. We'll see what happens in Bahrain. If they can nail the reliability, then hopefully they can push and develop a bit of speed from there. The Alpine, sporting its blue and pink livery. The first couple of flyaway races, of course, are going to be an all pink livery in deference to new sponsors BWT. Seemed to be could have had much more out of that test. I think they had some setup issues, and the car didn't seem the friendliest to drive. And then made a few setup changes over a lunch break, and within half a lap, Alonso got on the radio and said, "This is fantastic. This is much better. It's cured that." Oh, bang! And it went pop, and that was it. So the half a lap of running that he got before it went pop, he was mega impressed with the setup changes, but I don't think we quite got to see anything like the full potential of that car. So, but if Alonso says within half a lap, "Yep, this is much better, a step in the right direction," imagine what they can do with 2 or 3 laps of running. They'll be top of the timesheets before we know it.
It was suggested that he'd be very close to the top of the timesheets. Had all gone well, and how he accidentally turned on the barbecue mode switch, I really don't know. But it was a fairly spectacular fire, which it's going to cost an awful lot of money to sort out. But clearly, the car has a great deal of potential.
They didn't run DRS at any point during the shakedown, which was a slight concern, and looked like the engine was in a very turned down, very safe mode. Which, although I think they turned around afterwards and says, "Oh yeah, but if we'd have opened DRS, we'd have had half a second. If we'd have done X, Y, and Z, we'd have had that." So yeah, we're about there, but they didn't. So is there a reason for not having the DRS, or was that in an effort to look at the baseline aero rather than the ultimate performance of the aero?
I found it quite extraordinary that the amount of time and money that's been invested in these new cars, and probably the majority of them were incomplete, works in progress, and not quite ready to do everything. Even Red Bull and Ferrari and Mercedes, they were all having slightly different issues. Yes, they were a bit quicker, got more mileage under their belt, and were a bit more reliable. But I think in each of those cases, the 3 front runners probably, they would say the car's not there yet. There's a lot of development to come, and there will be a lot of development just in the next couple of weeks before we get to the Middle East.
Yeah, I think the development curve is going to be absolutely stratospheric this year as everybody gets their teeth stuck into it and starts looking at what the other teams have done. If you thought the development race was hotly contested in previous seasons, I'd love to see all the cars go back to Barcelona at the end of this year when it's all finished. Try and get a track temperature and conditions somewhat vaguely the same if you can, and just see how much quicker they go. They're already not too far off previous pre-season testing lap times. The regulations weren't designed to slow them down. I think that the regulation changes were designed to improve the racing, reduce the reliance on over-body downforce, cut down on the dirty air, cut down on the effects of the dirty air. Initially, all that seems to be about right, although Russell and Norris had said they were able to follow closer, easier overall. They could get, in years gone by, the point at which you started getting disturbed and losing grip was something stupid like 5 or 6 seconds, whereas they said, in that 2 second to 5 second, much easier. That 1 second to 2 second, about the same, and then the within a second, slightly better, but the slipstream doesn't have as much of an effect as of course, if there's less overbody downforce, then there's less overbody drag. So therefore, being in the slipstream and all the air and the outwash chucked out to the side, removes more of the air. So the slipstream effect in years gone by, I think, has been stronger. That'll be less. But having said that, heavier cars, and they seem to be more skittish and have less grip at low speed. I think high speed, they've actually got a lot more grip. Low speed, as that Venturi effect disappears off, the grip's reduced, so longer braking zones, I think that'll probably help overtaking as well if you've got a bigger percentage or just more time. You look at some of the corners last year and they're braking, the Mercedes in particular, they're almost braking as they start turning in. Well, you're never going to outbrake somebody if the point at which you brake is as you're turning into the corner. So longer braking zones, I think, are a good thing. So it's all shaping up to be rather good overall. Aston Martin next up, 296 laps. So reasonable lap times in the hands of Sebastian Vettel. He was in the 1 minute 19, so at least in the same second ballpark as the Mercedes and Red Bulls and others. Looks a little bit handier. Looks a lot better on track as well. I think all the teams. You said how good the some of the cars had looked on track. I think they've paid real attention to how the cars look on TV, not just under studio lights. And the Aston's very simple livery, the Aston Green with the luminous flashes, but that looked quite good and looked fairly stable. Not setting the world alight, but I don't think their plan was to set the world alight this year, was it? They're still building the factory and still putting all the infrastructure in place. But fingers crossed, it allows Vettel to get a bit of his mojo back and maybe scrap for a few podiums or maybe even better this year.
He was suggesting in a couple of interviews that I saw that he's feeling much more comfortable with the new car. He thinks it suits him better, and he's certainly hoping for a better season. Well, he's an old hand now. He's been around long enough that he doesn't have to entirely play the PR game, and he doesn't seem to care that much whether he does or he doesn't. So, I think if he's saying he generally thinks it's better, I'm quite happy to go with that because, he's pretty much on record. If he didn't think it was better, he'd say so.
Next up, then, Alfa Terry managed 308 laps and time just behind the Aston, again in the 1 minute 19s for Pierre Gasly. Did have a bit of an off-driver error, but I suppose that's what shakedowns are about, pushing the limit of the car and working out exactly what you can and can't do with it. But all seemed fairly happy in their camp. Again, another evolution of the livery, but looks rather good. I'm not sure I can see them making that huge jump to consistent podium challengers or race winners just because of the pecking order. I half think if they designed a better car, Red Bull would literally just swap it, paint the Red Bull in Alfa Tauri colours and vice versa, and say, there you are, get on with it. Which I think is what Honda and Super Aguri did one year, didn't they? The Super Aguri was better than the Honda, so they had the Super Aguri and gave Super Aguri the Honda and then got on with it.
One of the benefits of having the junior team, isn't it? Just going back to something you were saying earlier there, Jim. In terms of development, they're obviously going to have a very, very steep learning curve this year. What are the rules this year? Have they changed in terms of how much time they're allowed to spend? How much money? Is the cap the same as it was in 2021? Or have things been loosened off a little to allow for this new rapid pace of development they're going to have to enter into?
It's a double whammy, really. They've had the effect of the cost cap as the new regulations are coming in, so it's been doubly hard to try and develop an all-new, brand-new car, certainly from an aerodynamic and an overall philosophy, which obviously takes time. The rules in terms of CFD time and wind tunnel time and things like that have been rejigged so that those who finish at the very bottom of the championship get more time in the wind tunnel and are allowed more development time, etc., to try and improve the car. Those at the top get less time, so it's almost like in other race series you have a balance of performance, whether it's on restrictor plates on turbos or whether it's success ballast in terms of weight, or Formula One almost seems to have a balance of performance, but it's a financial or research and development penalty to try and even things out over time. So as it happens, finishing at the bottom of the pile does give you a bit more time and a bit more scope to do things.
The figure for the cost cap seemed to have remained constant as last year, but as you say, Jim, they've tweaked some of the rules around that, so they've written them in a slightly fuzzier way, so you can include some things you couldn't previously, and time spent on some things you couldn't previously. And yes, as you say, it ought to benefit the tail end of the field a little bit more in that they can do more. But the amount of money they can spend is the same. The rules are just a bit fuzzier. That could prove to be a problem a bit later on.
Does Formula One do fuzzy? It's an interesting concept. Can't see Ferrari being fuzzy, but the car looks good though. Definitely, I'm liking the look. They do seem to have gone back to the traditional colour red, haven't they, in recent years, rather than the day glow orange that they used to have in deference to, I think it was Marlboro who probably drove that one. But yes, it's nice to see them looking proper Rosso Corsa again. Lovely.
Yeah, I always quite like the dark red or the Rosso Corsa with the highlights of the Marlboro logos on it. It made the orange or the red or the day glow red pop that little bit more against the background of the Ferrari, which always looked quite nice. But yeah, I think it's a fairly simple livery, isn't it? It's a Ferrari, so paint it Ferrari red, you can't really go wrong. But in the last few years, they do seem to have gone wrong with that. But as you say, this year back to the proper red, and it's got black wings, and it looks proper. In terms of livery, it looked proper on track. It did the most number of laps, 439. Looked quick and composed both in the hands of Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. 1:19.6 for Charles Leclerc. And overall, whether they'll be P1, P2, P3 or P4.
It's interesting to note that neither of Ferrari or McLaren were doing the sort of real full-out go as fast as you can laps, were they? They weren't running on the softest tyres, which I believe Mercedes were doing. So perhaps a bit of sandbagging there. So we might be surprised by how good Ferrari or McLaren might well be.
I also got the impression that Ferrari is a slightly happier ship now than it was last season. There was talk towards the end of last season of Binotto being ousted, which is something Ferrari does on a fairly regular basis. He's not been there long. And the two drivers seem to be at odds with each other, and one sort of gets the impression from the statements and particularly from the body language that we are seeing in their pits that it's all slightly happier, and they do feel that things are going to get better this year. So maybe that put a brave face on it and just go for it. So yes, I think that the Ferrari is certainly going to feature larger this year. They're not going to be the big disappointment I think they were last season, the season before.
So the Ferrari team looking solid and reliable. They seem to have an air of a team just going about their program, just very, very unhurried, very unrushed, as much as you can be when you're pelting around a track at 200 miles an hour, to not appear rushed with things. But all seemed very calm, very very methodical, as you say, not going for the outright fastest lap time with soft tyres. But I think just looking at their average pace and their long run pace, they looked fairly happy. Although Mercedes ended up quickest and Red Bull second quickest, we'll get on to them in a minute. I thought the team of the test for me really was McLaren, with how good the livery looked. I've mentioned it before, and I will keep mentioning it for a long time. That is one good-looking livery. But the camp, they seemed fairly happy. They seemed to get on top of the porpoising issue a lot quicker than any of the other teams. Again, they said it is not ultimately a huge effect on lap time, as the effect disappears once you slow down a little bit, as you do for most corners. But they just seemed very composed, very together. Couple of tenths off the ultimate fastest time, but I think a little bit of that was a push from a Mercedes. But I'm liking the look of McLaren. I think there may be a good bet at a fiver on each of the drivers, and maybe for the team as well. This is not financial advice. The value of your investment can go down as well as up, and if you follow my betting advice, it probably will go down. But I just like the look of McLaren. It's good to see them somewhere back towards where they need to be, and hopefully joining a 2, 3 or 4-way fight for the championship. Because if we thought a 2-team, 2-driver fight for the championship was good, well, I'd quite like to see a 4-way, 8-driver, 6-driver fight. That would be good.
They're much better from a fan's point of view. Certainly, I'd very much welcome McLaren being back up there and back in the fight for podium places, if no better than that. And certainly, by the looks of the new car, the team does seem fairly well sorted. As I was saying about Ferrari, they seem to be comfortably going about what they've got to do. They know what they've got to do, and they seem to have the confidence that they can deal with any problems that might arise.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be nice to have a bit of variation. It has got a bit processional of the last few years, hasn't it? And having more people generating more interest. But hopefully, this is going to be a byproduct of the new rules and regulations as well. There's a lot more unknowns, and obviously, you're still going to have the people at the top who are going to be good no matter what. They've got the right team, they've got the right people. But it has thrown in a little bit of a curveball, if you like, to make things a little bit different. It could throw things up in the air a little. Let's hope so. Anyway, it would be nice to see someone else in there causing grief for the top two.
Well, I think you're definitely right. I mean, the top teams, you don't forget how to win a race overnight. The best drivers don't forget how to be quick overnight or over a winter break, as it happens. Might Mercedes and Red Bull have spent too much time on last year developing to try and round off the championship battle? Did Mercedes maybe do a little bit less development early in the season, looking at next year's car, and then suddenly realised, oh, hang on, we need to ramp this up? So did they start this year's car, then dial it down a little bit as the championship fight hotted up a bit? So I think the Mercedes development curve towards the end of the season was reasonably evident to see. And just as we saw in 2008 leading into 2009, Ferrari and McLaren so wrapped up in that championship battle that 2009 went completely by the by, and they both ended up with not very good cars, albeit they did win races in 2009, but no way near the leading pair of the Brauns and the Red Bulls. But of course, what Mercedes and Red Bull and the big teams can't do this year, going back to the rules, is spend their way out of trouble. They can't just think, oh, hang on, we didn't quite do that. Okay, that's not a problem at all. Hire another 300 of the brightest and best people and throw £1 million every couple of days at it, and we'll find some lap time. You've got to be very careful with that 140 million that they have to spend for the entire year, not including drivers and a couple of key personnel. That's not actually a lot of money when it comes to logistics and getting two cars on track at 20-odd races. That can get eaten up very, very quickly. So which teams have come out of the block very well and which teams have actually got any money left to develop throughout the year, it'll be interesting to see. But Red Bull looked reasonably good, reasonably quick. It was odd to see Verstappen's driving style, certainly early on as well. He just looked very smooth, very calculated, very, very un-Verstappen-like, to be honest. He was smooth and gentle on the car, wasn't throwing it around in true Verstappen style. So does this mean the car's a little bit more mellow to drive? Is it a little bit less edgy? So might it come towards Perez that little bit better?
Certainly the Red Bull, I mean, I was looking at some of the tech sketches of the way that Newey and his colleagues have designed the floor, and it's a work of art. If you look at it closely, all of those ripples have a purpose. They've all been carefully honed in the wind tunnel with CFD. So whereas the others were out there cutting holes and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, they seem to have solved that. I think that's the beauty of Newey having been around a long time. and having dealt with those issues before. He's must be second time into ground effects, so he learnt a lot the first time around.
Yeah, there's certainly plenty of lead designers and chief engineers up and down the pit lane that weren't even born the last time ground effect was a thing in Formula One.
Quite so.
It might be on sketches and drawings and anecdotal evidence, but there's nothing like having it in your own head and having seen it firsthand, is there? And the last team on our list to discuss, and a team we wish all the best for this year, as most people seem to, is Williams, who of course were around well and truly the last time ground effect was a thing. They seemed improved, if not spectacular. I mean, the livery certainly looked good, and Alex Albon seemed to be rather happy to be back in a race seat, even if he has still got quite a bit of Red Bull sponsorship plastered all over him. It was a little bit odd to see, but compared to years past, they ran a good number of laps in the middle of the lap charts and seemed, if not quite the quickest, seem to have some decent, solid pace around them. Again, times are always a tricky thing.
They've always had problems with early season reliability. It's really been their Achilles heel over several seasons now, and that doesn't seem to be the case this season. The car seems to be sort of there or thereabouts, and perhaps we'll see them nearer the front of the midfield than further back.
I'm sure we all wish Williams very well. I mean, they lost their figurehead, haven't they, last year? I mean, obviously wasn't connected to the team anymore, but still had his name. And I'm sure Frank Williams' spirit still lives very, very strongly within that team. And for that reason alone, I'm sure we all wish them very well. I think Alex Albon was quoted as saying that they have a great foundation to start the year on. And obviously there's a lot of PR-ness going on there, but I think they actually mean it. I think they do realise that they're not going to be the fastest straight out of the blocks, but if anyone's got resilience and strength and depth to draw on, it's going to be Williams, surely.
Yeah, they're strong within the team, and Frank engendered this extraordinarily strong loyalty, and that seems to have carried over to the new management. Everybody in the factory and in the team seems to be working for the corporate good of the company, which is just great. And I was pleased with one or two of the comments. I mean, it was good to see Alex Albon back. I think he deserved to be back. And I think it's a drive that he'll look after well and do well with it.
So there we go. We head towards the first proper pre-season test rather than a shakedown in a few weeks' time. So I think that what the cars look like there compared to Barcelona will be interesting to keep an eye on, but there's a bit more television coverage for those that subscribe or have access to it through other means, so it'll be interesting to watch, and ultimately I think it's a good thing that the rules have headed in the direction they're going in, and if it improves the racing then all the better for it. If it shakes up the order a bit, then all the better for it. So there's lots of reasons to be optimistic about this season, so I for one can't wait.
So moving on to other forms of motorsport and going completely to the other end of the scale from Formula One, we have Extreme E, which has been very interesting to watch, which never ceases to amuse me. The fact that when they're racing in the desert, as they have been of late, they still manage to have all this space, yet still come into contact with each other, banging doors and turning each other over. But that was a fantastic start to the season out there in Saudi Arabia. We saw, again, linked to Formula One, the arrival of McLaren in their car with Tanner Faust, who you may or may not remember was one of the presenters of Top Gear USA a few years ago. And they actually flattered to deceive a bit there, McLaren. They showed some great form. They won one of their heats, but unfortunately came a cropper with Tanner at the wheel. Spoiler alert, in the final. So They've shown a lot of promise there. I know I'm a bit biased when it comes to McLaren, but I'm keen for them to do well. But it's a great start to the season. It does seem to be situation normal at the top though, with Rosberg's team sort of still there at the top. I'm just looking at pictures of them now. There they are. Yes, congratulations, you've won. But yes, did anyone else see any of this, or is it just me?
I saw the accident, and yes, that was an almighty shunt, wasn't it? And one of the downsides about racing on sand is once it digs in and starts to go, one end of the car digs in and stops very suddenly, but there's a lot of momentum and a lot of weight behind it, so the rest of it seems to overtake the rest of it far quicker. It's kind of like porpoising, but on steroids, isn't it? And leads to rather more sweeping up needed afterwards. But it's I just like the name of the place more than anything. The fact that it was called Nyom, and that's where they were racing, and all the cars as they went past didn't actually go Nyom. They just go whoo, and then bang when they hit the deck. But
they've got some fantastic runoff areas compared to Formula One, haven't they? I mean, like Christopherson in the final, when he was sort of, I think he overdid it coming around one of the corners, went so wide but still managed to stay ahead, which was fantastic. And as I say, they've got all this desert to play in, and generally, as long as you don't mash the flags down and then get yourself a penalty, you can pretty much use a fair amount of the space you're given. It's brilliant. It's just such a fun thing to watch.
Well, it kind of reminds me in a way of the old school safari rallies in the WRC. There's a bit of, okay, well, if you go that way, it's a little bit flatter, so you can go flat out, but it's a bit longer. It's almost like, okay, drive in a really wide circle at 200 miles an hour, or do a very tight circle, so you have to slow down a lot more, but in essence, start here, go over there as fast as you can. Start lines here, finish lines there, go, get on with it. Draw your own, if motor racing, as Graham Hill, I think, once described it, was, the track is my canvas and the car is my paintbrush or something. The desert is my canvas, the car is a paintbrush, but you've got a much bigger canvas to work with. It leads to some more interesting art, shall we say.
No, it's good stuff. Did you see much of it, Graham?
No, I haven't watched any of this season so far, but I did watch a few last season, and I really enjoyed it. The fact that it is your observation is a very apt one, that although they have all of that amount of space, they still seem to manage to crash into each other. God knows where that is, but nevertheless, it's entertaining. But it's just a fascinating branch of motorsport.
It's different, isn't it? It's very much of its time, and I think it's only going to increase in popularity as more and more people expect to see alternative power in the, I was going to say in the engine bay, it could be anywhere, can't it? But alternative powered vehicles racing one another. And I think we mentioned last time that I think Extreme E are now looking at potentially racing with hydrogen fuel cells in the cars, as opposed to the battery power that they've got at the minute, which, if they can make that work safely, that's got a huge amount of potential, I would have thought.
Quite so. I think that there have been some interesting developments in the science there in the last year or so, and I keep seeing in the various science magazines articles about how it's developing very fast. Yes, if that's the case, I'm still of the view, broadening the conversation out slightly, I'm still of the view that EVs are not the way to go, not in the long term. So it's a short-term stopgap, and I think some of the manufacturers also are of the same view that, okay, we have to do what our political masters tell us we've got to provide, but it isn't the right way forward, and that probably hydrogen is. But there we are. It'll resolve itself by 2035, when we all have to be in EVs, unless by that stage there's been a hydrogen breakthrough. Maybe that's not an unfortunate phrase, but I think it is. I was driving hydrogen-powered cars, in the experimental ones admittedly, in the late 80s and early 90s. It's taken us an awful long time to get to not being ready to go, not into production. Extraordinary.
Well, it's a similar story to electric vehicles, isn't it? I was watching a rundown and review of the history of the Ford Ka or Ka or Car or however you want to pronounce it, and the various models that came out of it. And I've got very, very fond memories of the Mark I Ka, and my first company car was a Sport Ka, and I absolutely loved it to pieces. But how some of the Latin American markets took it and turned it into station wagons or estates and things like that, and then just randomly halfway through the video popped up with, and of course Ford developed an electric version of the Ka in 1999 or 98 or whenever they did, and you think, hang on, there was an all-electric Mark I Ka that Ford had developed. Why why wasn't that a thing? Why didn't they push on with it? Why is it in 2022 is the first time that we're seeing proper mainstream all-electric vehicles when it's been around for ages? If they'd have stuck with it at the time, where would we be now? If we've come this way in a couple of years, why aren't we much further ahead? It seems odd.
You've only got to track the SMMT statements, and if they are representative of the industry, and I believe they are, what's pushing the EVs is purely political action in this country and across Europe. And these are the same. You see, I'm slightly longer in the tooth than the rest of you. These are the same political masters that insisted we should all go over to diesel cars in the 80s. And I remember very well writing articles at that time. We don't want these dirty, smelly, rough driving cars. They weren't a good idea. Okay, they were steadily refined, but they're still essentially dirty and smelly, which is why governments no longer want them. The governments that persuaded us that we should all have one just 20, 30 years ago. Political cycles seem to matter more than the technology.
Well, they do seem to sort of, one pushes the other. I mean, the political sort of expediency does mean that those who have to adapt do adapt, and we do get technology, increasing in an efficiency, and it speeds things up. Because I can remember around about the time that the KA, whatever it's called, being up in London, seeing that I think it was Westminster Council a good 20 odd years ago were running Peugeot 106 electric vehicles, but I imagine they didn't have a range of much more than about 50 miles, if that, and would have taken about a week and a half to charge. And I think that's the thing that's improved, isn't it? The fact that these things are now usable pretty much on a daily basis, notwithstanding the 45 minutes even on a three-phase charger that you have to endure at a petrol station. But, these things, it just shows that when that is the fait accompli, that's what can be achieved. And if this is what's going to happen it appears to be that Extreme E are hedging their bets here, or perhaps they're trying, no pun intended, to drive the issue a little bit by saying, hang on a minute, there is an alternative, and fair play to them for that. I think that needs to be the case. It doesn't necessarily all have to be electric. If the two can coexist, so much the better. But I've always been a fan of the hydrogen idea. Again, you've got to be careful that driving into one doesn't set off something that sort of demolishes a city block. But at the same time, I don't think that's an insurmountable thing. And if they're talking about doing it for racing, that's got to be the perfect sort of arena for proving that it's a safe technology.
I think the first car manufacturer to come up with the Hindenburg as a model name might regret it. But there you go.
Crash and burn. Yeah. No, it's going to be an interesting season. I'm looking forward to the next one, and we will keep you posted with what we find when we watch.
So just rounding up our motorsport chat for this week, I've seen that the tickets for the Formula E Monaco E-Prix have been released, and they're somewhat of a bargain, to be honest. I mean, I said a couple of episodes ago that I wouldn't mind getting up to London to see Formula E in real life, because I think I was a fan of Formula One before I went to a Grand Prix, but the first time I ever went to a Grand Prix, that feeling of seeing a Formula One car go flat out into turn one at Silverstone, and the old turn one, not the new turn one having been redeveloped, was just absolutely blew my mind. So I think that Formula E is one of those things I keep saying to myself I must get into more, but I think I need to go and see one to get a real feel for it. But I never thought I'd say the phrase Monaco and bargain. But the tickets for the Monaco E-Prix are an absolute bargain. They're €30 if you want a grandstand ticket. Everything else is free. So it's whether you think that speaks volumes as to the attendance or whatever, I don't really care. Get along to it. If I'm going to spend the next couple of days researching cheap flights down to Nice or possibly even driving, to be fair, I'll have a look at the charging network and see how I can get down there. I think that might be quite fitting to try and drive there in an EV, watch an E-Prix, and then drive back in an EV. But €30 for a grandstand ticket for,
That's a real
for an
bargain.
FIA
That's a real bargain.
Formula event at Monaco. That's got to be a bargain, to be fair, hasn't it?
And if you're going to have any racing on city courses, some of the city courses they race on look a bit like the infamous Detroit car park from many, many years ago. Some of you will remember that. But Monaco is a real race circuit. It just happens to be in a city. Well worth going to see.
Just looking at this, it's €30 flat fee. It's €30 no matter where you want to go. And you can actually see, at the time of recording this, Grandstand B Casino is one of the most, obviously one of the most popular. There are 14 free places as I look at this now. 1% available, €30. You can also have, let's have a look. Anthony Noge, 4% available, 13 spaces, €30. Unfortunately, the only one that's completely gone is the dock side. That's Grandstand T3. They've all gone because that's the main view of the pits, isn't it? But apart from that, there are others there, 59% available, 44% available, 60% available in one of them. So that's the swimming pool, and the swimming pool's a good one because they zigzag through there. So,
that's a good spot.
If you're listening to this at some point early March, maybe have a quick look at Monaco-E-Prix.com because you might stand a good chance of getting a decent ticket.
It seems quite nice. They all have a few of the grandstands, which are still relatively available, have a view of the pits. You can see things going on there, but all of the others have a giant screen. I've been to Silverstone quite a few times over the years and not had a clue as to what's actually going on in the race. And quite a few of the races, funnily enough, being Silverstone, have been wet, so it gets even more confusing after about 7 laps when people pit or don't pit. And trying to follow it on the radio that you can barely hear, and this is before the days of 3G, 4G or 5G, so being able to watch it on your phone as well as watch it in real life, to have that the big screen there, so you know exactly what's going on at all times. That seems good, but I've watched a few of the highlight of the first round of Formula E this year, and the qualifying format I thought was a bit of a gimmick in the run-up to it, but actually that was a bloody exciting qualifying session. It sort of actually had a bit of, oh, go on, no, can he, oh, go on, that's good, but it kept that, just by splitting the drivers up, you got that willy won't-y sensation repeated several times over the course of the qualifying session, so it seemed quite good. It was, it almost had shades of Jerez 97, where they were all setting an identical lap time, but it just seemed to repeat that and keep it going. So it seemed to work quite well. As a race series, it's taken a few criticisms on board, or thought of a few new ideas as well, and implemented them, and sort of got on with it and done it quite well. So it's definitely gathering momentum and gathering energy as a series. I think it's taking the basic format of, well, let them all go out and do a qualifying lap and line them up in that order, and then let them do a longer series of laps is fairly tried and tested, but it's introducing just enough variety without making it seem too gimmicky. I'm still not sure about fan boost as an idea, and the power boost if you go wide on a corner and you get the boost zone but you miss it. Again, I'm not sure about that, to be fair, but the qualifying session spot on, and let's face it, €30 for a ticket at Monaco, well, let's go, why not?
I suspect that it's actually with the complexity of the rules, that it's possibly better to watch live than it is to watch on the TV, because all of those rule things are played out on the TV, and I think it somewhat spoils the action. I would certainly prefer to go and see it. There's
almost too much information to take in, isn't there? I mean,
yeah.
I think I agree with you with the gimmickry. It's the same reason I'm not so keen on things like DRS in Formula One. I mean, just keep it simple. Let it play out in front of you, and see what you see is what you get. But I agree. I do love watching it, and €30 for anything in Monaco, and that's pretty much what you normally pay for a bloody ice cream there, in my experience.
I was going to say,
there's no such thing as anything cheap in Monaco.
I've done a reasonably priced weekend in Monaco before. It was I went there 2 weeks or a week before the Monaco Grand Prix. There was a motor show on at the forum that they have there. Went with a mate from work at the time. He had a family friend that lived in Monaco in an apartment, so he put us up for 3 or 4 nights. So, we managed to do the entire weekend in Monaco on an absolute shoestring, but get around and see everything being constructed for the Grand Prix and get a feeling of it. Walked the track layout several times, had a few beers in the bar at the Rascasse. And how much? No, only 4, not 40. Oh, that is for 4. Oh, I do apologise. Sorry, there you go. Do you take credit card? Yes, lovely. Thank you very much. And bumped into John Button and said hello to him, and he seemed to be enjoying himself there. But having said that, if you venture slightly out of the very centre of it all, there's plenty of restaurants and bars that are far more affordable. And we found a restaurant up the corner, round the corner, down the hill, and off to the left slightly, where we had 3 courses and several beers each, and I think it was less than €20 a head. So if the cost puts you off going to Monaco, you can do it slightly more reasonably. So if you can get along, do get along. I think that might be quite a nice holiday after the last couple of years we've had. A weekend in the sunshine in Monaco can't be a bad idea.
It is a great place, and it's quite surreal when you sort of turn corners and you see them and you recognise exactly where you are, and they're even still painted red and white throughout the year, and it's quite surreal going through the tunnel, albeit going the other way, and emerging and thinking, why do I know this? Ah, yes, now I get it. No, it's an amazing place. It's a bit like a prison for rich people a lot of the time, but it is an amazing place, and it's one of those places, if you are a motorsport fan, particularly a Formula One fan, you probably ought to go to at least once in your life, and this could be the perfect opportunity. Like we keep saying, we're not being paid, by the way, by Formula E. €30 is all you'll need to pay just to go and sit in the stand. It is an absolute bargain. And if you happen to be interested in Formula E and you live in or around the Surrey area, around the M25, Brooklands Museum has a Formula E car from a couple of seasons back, one of the Mercedes ones. You may have seen it on the Brooklands programme that's on yesterday, the first series, where they were shunting it around the site. So if you want to go and have a look, it is there in all its glory. It's quite an impressive looking thing. It's a lot bigger than I thought, actually. It's comparable with a Formula One car. And it's the proportions are a bit, they take a bit of getting used to, very swoopy. But it's quite interesting to see one actually in the carbon, as it were.
And a great day out anyway.
It's a fantastic place. Regardless whether they're paying me or not, I'll always big up Brooklands. Fantastic place.
Too right.
I'll go with that.
It's odd with many race series. It doesn't take many lapses or many slides for it to fall out of favour. Yet, similarly, it doesn't take many tweaks or many revisions to all of a sudden make the series come alive again. British touring cars being a case in point. The mid-90s, late 90s super touring era, that was fantastic to watch. And then all of a sudden in the early 2000s, it just lost its way and became a not very inspiring series to watch. And then a few revisions and a few tweaks, and all of a sudden you have different teams and different drivers and different entrants coming back to it, and it seems to get a new lease of life. For me, WRC had the same thing. Colin McRae and Richard Burns and Tommy Mäkinen and Carlos Sainz Sr., as he is now. Watching all that again, mid-late 90s, early 2000s was phenomenal. Then it kind of lost its way for me a bit, but watching the last round at Monte Carlo, and I haven't caught up on Sweden yet, it just seemed, oh yeah, I remember this, and I remember why I like it now. Hopefully Formula E can build on all that and do that the same, because let's face it, if it becomes more environmentally friendly and more politically correct, then more racing can only be a good thing, can't it?
Like you, I loved the super touring, the touring cars of the 90s. They were just monsters, and the drivers were generally. I covered it in some detail for different radio stations, so I got to know some people, and it was just a great time to be around the touring cars. And I'm not sure that in recent years it's been as exciting. It's been perhaps a little more brutal. They seem to all want to crash into each other rather more than used to be the case. But budgets are different, I guess. But I have sort of good memories of that era. I do remember a particularly stormy Thruxton when the press tent, which was at the time being used for the driver's briefing, practically blew away. So we were all asked by the clerk of the course, could we put our chairs in a ring around the support for the marquee to stop it blowing away. So we we all sat there at some distance while this tornado virtually passed through the circuit. But some great times there.
Well, how do you follow that?
You won't get that at Monaco, will you? That's the downside to it. I remember being at Anglesey for a round of the mini challenge that we were doing one year, and you're right out looking over the ocean. It's getting a bit breezy as the afternoon was carrying on, and when you saw the locals and the people that work there battening things down and tying down the lead weights with even more lead weights, you thought, should we take the tent down? I think we better had. So we took the tent down, put it under the car, lashed everything down to the car, to the wheels, to the drums of fuel. Those that left the tents up, they didn't have any tents in the morning, but it was quite an odd feeling being rocked to sleep in the motorhome that we were all staying in, just gently swaying. And then at one point, I swear it got up on two wheels. This thing, as it was just rocking from side to side. But it was an entertaining weekend.
I think that would be the difference. If it was Monaco, they would weigh the tent down with gold bars rather than lead weights.
Definitely.
See, the things we'll do for motorsport. It's been a fascinating chat we've had, I think, and we've come round full circle, as racing circuits tend to. That's a terrible shoehorn, isn't it? But there we go. No, it's been great. We've had a great chat this evening. We've got a lot to look forward to this year, I think, in terms of motorsport, and let's hope the year improves in a number of ways, but it's going to be a good year. I'm certainly looking forward to Extreme E and getting back into Formula One, I think. And I'm looking forward to Bahrain and the next set of tests where we might actually get to see a little bit more of it. And then who knows what the year's going to have in store for us.
Lots to look out for.
We touched on it briefly with Super Touring and discussions, but British Touring Car starts as well. Towards the end of April. That starts a little bit later, so I think in the coming weeks we'll try and do a little rundown on that as well to whet your appetite.
Good idea.
And on that good idea, it's probably time to end. So from me, Jim, it's goodbye and take care.
From me, Graham, yes, look after yourselves, take care out on the roads.
And from me, Dave, it's been great having you along. Look forward to catching up next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.
UK Motor Talk, a First Take Media production.